All right, welcome everybody to the FAAB podcast. Today, I'm super excited to have on Mike Mark. He's someone that I personally worked with now for several years. When I think about sales and closers and sales recruitment, training, all of that, there is literally no one else on the planet that I have more respect for and would go to with all of my questions. So I think he's about to bring a ton of knowledge to this podcast, which is going to be really, really cool to hear later on for everyone that's watching on Facebook or listening on their iPhone. So really excited to have you, Mike. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Tyler. I'm excited to be here, and it's been a hell of a ride. I mean, shoot, like in the past couple of years, it's insane.
Madness. While the world was shutting down, we were just like,
and nobody believes it. That's the funny part. You know, if you tell people, they're like, "That's what are you talking about?"
Yeah, it sounds suspicious. It's almost, it's like, are you sure? In fact, so suspicious, you know, I was dealing with Square, my payment processor the other day, who for the third time locked me up because they're like, wait a minute, it's increasing pretty quickly here. We need to ask you some extra questions. I'm like, no, our business is just scaling. This is how it works. So all part of the package. So Mike, thanks again for joining me here on the podcast today. Can we start off by just kind of giving us a little bit of background on you and what you do now and how you grew into that role?
Yeah, so pretty much when someone is stuck in their sales process, and normally it's like the founders there and they're overwhelmed, or they just don't want to sell their product. Maybe they've been taking sales calls for months on end and back-to-back calls, or even now with setters being more of a thing, a lot of them are getting stuck just on Messenger all day, talking and chatting and setting appointments and doing strategy sessions. And usually what happens is someone will run that for a little while and then they just can't anymore. They hit you, hit a wall. It's exhausting. It's frustrating. It will burn you out. And for a lot of the business owners, they'll do it because it's something that they know they need to do to get to where they want to be, but it's not something that they are inherently good at or want to do. They just do it because they're willing to do whatever it takes.
Yeah.
And that starts to take a toll on them energetically and emotionally, and sometimes even like on their family life. And so usually when someone hits that point, that's when I get the introduction. And someone's like, it's funny, like at masterminds, anytime there's a mastermind, we'll get a wave of people right after someone else's mastermind. Because as someone in the room is like, oh my God, I'm falling apart and this is what my reality is. And someone else is like, oh, you guys got to talk to coaching sales. And then the intros start coming in like crazy. And that's pretty much what it is. And we help people get out of their sales process. We help them find reliable salespeople who are amazing at what they do, and then be able to really allow them to focus on scaling the company and working on the company and building a better product and all the things that they want to be doing, as opposed to just being stuck taking sales calls or responding to messages all day.
Yeah, super powerful. You help take business owners who are just drowning in their own success, which is a great problem. Honestly, it's a good problem to have. You're drowning in their own, sales process, but helping them bring in the right people to make that process smoother, and managing them and training them all along the way. I think, one thing that probably should be said even more is the support that you bring, to your clients, and the support that you bring to the closers, that you're not just like throwing closers at the wall. It's just like, there's a ton of support there as well. Do you want to hit on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, like the best thing would be just what the clients say. And yesterday we literally got a message, Cody got a message on one of his posts from a client that said, like, you guys are literally the best team I've ever worked with and offer the most support I've ever had. And that's just kind of one of my things was I wanted to make the product really high touch. And the metric that I really care about is the percentage of people that get the promised outcome on our offer. That to me is the most important thing. And notoriously inside of the coaching or course world, it's often pretty low, and people are marketing and sales focused. And so our desire was to say, okay, how can we be as high touch as possible to make sure that our reputation is impeccable?
Yeah.
And that's pretty much what we've done.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And it shows throughout, like working with you and being one of your clients myself, it shows like how involved you guys are and how involved you're willing to be. Like there's certain things where we're like, okay, no, we got that, we're good, even though you guys are still there ready to help with it. And so it's just like, it's phenomenal to, there's a lot of other people out there, I think, that provide, and teams that provide closers, but I think a ton of them lack like the ongoing like coaching and support provided to the closers. Like, it's not just like you're throwing some random guy at an offer and like hoping it works, which I think is really common.
And I think it's more than that, to be honest. I think that what happens is that I think like an engineer, and I just happen to be a salesperson who thinks like an engineer, whereas most people that build competitive types of offers, they think like salespeople, and that's not how I think. So I'm an operator. I know every part of the business. I know accounting as well as I know sales. I just solved the problem that kind of puts us in a position where then companies love our support and want to partner with us, and we're able to partner in and help them continue scaling. And we'll do equity exchanges in order to help people scale and take them further and really like throw our weight behind them, cross promote them to our list. And that's something that's been really big for us. And that's why we wanted to do that. Was if we can play long-term games with long-term people, that's the game I want to be in, not the quick cash grab and make fast money and then have a shitty conscience. One of the things that Richard Pryor said in a stand-up comedy special, and it just like punched me right in the face, was, my greed does not exceed my self-respect. And that's something that I always think about, is that if I ever feel like my self-respect is not in the room, then I won't do the deal. And I'm a big believer of a no deal is better than a bad deal. And so those are kind of big principles to me. And I'm also a big believer of all money isn't good money, right? I want money that is good money. I don't want all money, right? And so a lot of people prioritize revenue over reputation. That's not what we do. We prioritize reputation over revenue, and that shows at the long run. And it's aligned. That's the same shit Amazon's saying, is that in the long term, there's no difference between the customer's best interest and then the shareholder's best interest. They're actually aligned. So that's what we're doing, is we're constantly trying to figure out, how do we prioritize the customer's best interests? And then as a result, we have the best product, and the network effect build up on it.
Absolutely. And that shows in even like the things that you're willing to do for your clients. Like you said, that you also even consider equity shares to help them scale. Like, that is really putting your money where your mouth is, and in showing that you truly believe in your clients, and that it's not a partnership that like you're just exchanging cash for, a service and then walking away. Like, being willing to put an equity share into a company, I think, is massive.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is like long-term games, long-term people. That's what we're trying to play. It's so easy to think like, I just want to make the money today, but is it at the expense of your conscience? Is it at the expense of your self-respect or self-worth? If it is, it's not worth it. No amount of money is worth a guilty conscience.
100%. And then that compounds too. Like, there are people I think out there that can really like they are not like myself or you, and like they can sleep at night doing terrible things, which is really shitty. But like, there are plenty of people out there, I would think, who can sleep easy at night doing terrible things. But I think in today's digital world, like, that catches up to you quick. Like, bad PR builds really quick. If you're a bad operator in a space and you're putting your name out there to the level that you need to be to scale a business, and you're doing poorly, people are going to hear about it.
I mean, and they're going to share that.
Yeah.
He's a fucking joke. Nobody takes them seriously.
He's a punchline a lot of times.
Or Dan Locke, it's actually a joke inside of our community. Like, not inside of our Scale Your Sales community, inside of the internet marketing, the coaching, the course creator, the service provider community. HTC is a fucking joke, because they had great marketing and a terrible product, and that's the outcome you get. Versus, I'd rather have amazing product and let my product lead our growth as opposed to our marketing. And it's just a little bit of an inversion that a lot of people aren't thinking like.
Yeah.
Dan Locke scaled bigger than we did, faster than we did, but he's also not relevant anymore. So while he was super relevant for maybe 6 months to a year, now nobody respects them.
Yeah. I mean, most of his students, I think they're in your DMs, like saying, "Hey, I took a course. Can I sell for you?" And it's just like,
and most business owners who tried it, they realized what they got. You know what I mean? So and it's kind of like, okay, well, and their whole position was, oh, there's no risk to you. But if I'm fronting the ad spend to get you the calls, that's risk. That's a lot of risk.
That's
There's the
huge risk.
opportunity cost of missed sales, and then there's the risk of the actual outlay of cash for calls. There is real risk. I don't care if you do it on commission only. There's massive amounts of risk to me as an operator to scale this thing with your shit ass not knowing how to close a call.
100%.
Yeah.
Yes. And when you get like, when you have a good closer come in and they close right out the gate and like and then they improve their scales like from then on, like it's incredible to watch versus someone who's just like basically thrown in and they pitched themselves and they marketed themselves. Like they were more of a marketer than actually like a closer when they get on the calls, which is just totally backwards. So sales is often a major bottleneck for agency owners, who is the main base of our listeners here. Why do you think so many people consider phone sales hard?
Well, sales is a difficult skill to learn because it's an oral tradition. So learning the skill of sales, I kind of liken it to like if you wanted to be a pimp, there's not a book on pimping. You have to hang around pimps and hear them talk game. And then same thing with like if you are trying to get into pickup, you know, you can maybe read books, but you got to be in game and be around guys to kind of get around, like take it in and make that language a part of you, right? And sales is a language. That was like when I first came in to study sales, that's how I treated it. I treated it as if I was learning Spanish, or I was learning math, or I was learning computer programming. Sales is just a language. So if I understand the syntax and the structure and the building blocks of the language, I have the control and the mastery. But the thing is, it's difficult because also it's a complex adaptive system. So any sort of human interaction is not linear in the way it behaves. Human interactions are complex and adaptive. So for those of you guys who this might be a little bit over your head, it's fine. Complexity is a scientific theory, and it's why we can't predict the weather 2 years from now, right? It's just there's too many moving parts inside of this, and it's kind of an amalgamation that arises out of the sum of all the parts that's different than the actual sum. So the whole is greater than the sum of the parts in complexity, right? Yeah. And so like a human city, so cities are complex adaptive systems. Our bodies are complex adaptive systems. That's why it's so hard to get diet and nutrition right, because everybody's bodies are different. Everybody has slightly different genetics. Everybody has slightly different starting points. Everybody has slightly different experiences as children. Maybe you grew up with mold in your home. Maybe your parents were fat. Maybe your parents were healthy or fit. Maybe your parents had you when they were old. Maybe your parents had you when they were young, right? There's so many variables that come into this that you have to consider. Mm-hmm. And most people try and treat sales as if it's a linear system.
Like A plus B equals C, like trying to treat it like math. And it's
if this, then that logical thought processes, but that's not how sales is working. It's this more complex adaptive system. And so, and it comes, you are a lot better at selling when you have frameworks. And then the other thing is, I liken it a little bit to sometimes if you were to start rapping, right? So a lot of stand-up comedians and rappers describe the same experience when they start, is that they have their favorite rappers or they have their favorite comedians. And when they first start the craft, their job is just to try and imitate the people that they look up to. And then through imitating multiple different people, you start to find the commonalities of all their styles, but also the differences of all their styles, and then how their unique personalities and life experiences play into that. And then you start to refine and develop your own style. So it's a journey, and it's not something you can just immediately do. It's like learning a language, right? It took us years to be able to master English to the degree of fluency that we have. And you can still practice, even if you're a fluent native speaker, you can still practice and become a poet, become an essayist, become a more advanced speaker or user of the English language. Well, the same goes for sales.
I totally agree. And I think what's frustrating for a lot of, new business owners, agency owners alike, is they have like incorrect expectations of the learning curve that is involved in taking your very first, set of sales calls. And so like they'll take 5 calls and get super frustrated that they haven't closed somebody yet. And it's like, when you look at like the span of what it takes to build a business and the length of what goes into building a business, and someone that's just brand new at starting, like I'm constantly pushing in the marketplace, like you have to go easier on yourself. You have to give yourself more time, give yourself more reps, like allow that learning curve to happen. But I don't know what it is, if it's like in the water or if it's a millennial thing or a Gen Z thing or what, but like if, you know, a lot of people, if they're not closing on like their fifth call, like they're like, oh, I need to change niche. Or, oh, you know, the industry is bad, or, oh, you know, the agency world isn't working right now, or COVID. Like, and it's like, no, 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 like you're on call 5. You've never taken sales calls before. And what you're explaining right now is so true. There's a ton of complexities. And so you really need to get in your reps, understand your frameworks, and get more time under it, you know, like get more reps basically.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example. I'm going to look it up just so I have the facts exactly right, but I know what it was. Okay, hold on. I'm finding a piece of information for you guys that it will be interesting. But one of my big beliefs is that most people just don't stick with a problem long enough. Okay, and it was exactly right. So Einstein took 10 years to solve the problem of the theory of relativity. Imagine spending 10 years on one problem.
Yes.
Most people won't even spend 10 days, nonetheless 10 months on one problem. And so to give you guys also, if you're listening, a little bit of a better expectation, like when I really started launching coaching sales, I had a lot of experience, like a lot of experience. So I knew how to write copy. I knew how to run ads. I knew how to build funnels. I knew how to close high ticket sales like in my sleep all day long. I knew how to structure offers. I knew the whole gamut of the thing, right? It still took me, of running ads, it took me 6 months to find offer market match and message market match. And that was me managing my ads, writing my copy, taking my sales calls, and I knew it. I knew what I was doing. That's the crazy part. If you don't know what you're doing and you're new to this, it may even take longer to dial it in. So it's really understanding that, like, you have to have the willingness and the tenacity to solve a problem for long enough. And what happens is, the shift for most of you guys, if you are finding yourself getting frustrated really easily, it's because you're attached to the outcome and you're not curious and experimenting. So when I first learned how to sell, I would treat every sales call as a micro laboratory. So every call was an experiment to try one new idea, right? And I'd test an idea constantly on sales calls. And my question was just, did this get me closer? I didn't need to get the sale. I just needed to be closer to getting the sale, right? Because if each shift got me a little bit closer, then once I stack them all up in my experiments, I'll find end to end the way to sell this product. And so that's a very helpful mental model for you guys, or a frame that you can use, is to treat each call as an experiment and be interested in the data, have fun solving the problem. Like, a lot of times you're going to really, really enjoy the process of solving the problems.
Or you should, if you're on the right, I think if you're on the right path, you should enjoy that process.
Correct. If you don't enjoy the process, there's one of two things. Either your perspective is a little bit off kilter and you can shift your perspective and find a way to enjoy the process, or you're just out of alignment with your core strengths or who you are as a person. And then you maybe need to shift to a different business model, or you maybe need to shift to something that's more in alignment with who you are as a person.
Correct. Yeah, totally agree. So on that note, you know, I totally agree. I think that, you know, you said Einstein took 10 years for the theory of relativity, it was?
Yep.
Yeah. Like 10 years to hone that in.
Can I give you one more example really fast?
Yeah.
If you guys have ever read Elon Musk's biography, the man wanted to build electric cars and go to Mars since he was in college. And he had been working on solving that problem since college. PayPal was actually a stepping stone to get the capital to solve an immediate problem so that he could solve that long-term problem. Like, the man decided in his 20s what he was going to do. Same thing with Jeff Bezos. If you read The Everything Store, he decided at 35 that he was going to build the Everything Store, but he built a bookstore, and then he built it into a book and music store, and then he built it into a book, music, and TV, or DVD store, right? And then through that, he was able to keep doing it. And it took him 20 years from the start of Amazon to it actually being an everything store. And Elon's been about 25 years and he still hasn't hit Mars, but he does have electric cars. He is shifting the culture and everything.
With NASA, like he's going to Mars. Like he's for sure going to Mars, and it's like the momentum is built now. And I think there's just a huge lesson in that for, I don't know if it's just millennials or Gen Z behind us or what's going on. But we just
lazy. We're lazy. It's not a generational thing. It's just a laziness thing. We want what's easy, but oftentimes there's this one thing I heard on a Joe Rogan podcast episode that they said is like, everybody wants to win the lottery, but the lottery will fucking ruin you, is what he said. And I think it's so interesting because like you didn't become the person to deserve that. So when you get it, you will squander it. And if you build up your skill sets and you become the person who earns it, it's a completely different reality than being a person who is given it. And you think that being given it is going to be awesome and it's going to solve your problems, but it won't, because you won't have the capacity to handle it.
That's why, like, I don't know the statistic, but I know it's a really high percentage of lottery earners go bankrupt within like a few years of winning the lottery. And yeah, it's madness. I think one major lesson, if you take anything away from this podcast episode, is stick with something for a reasonable amount of time. What's reasonable can be decided by you. But when you hear how long it took, big stars like Elon Musk and freaking Albert Einstein and Mike himself, who knew what he was doing going into his business, and it still took you, you said several months, a year to get. So I mean, when you hear these stories of people who are successful and the time it took them, like, reflect, where are you at right now? Are you frustrated because you're 30 days into a new business and you haven't sold your first 10K deal yet? Like, you're just a drop in the bucket right now. You have to stick through it and see through it longer, learn how to, enjoy that process. And if you really don't enjoy that process and you're just, holding out for that first payday and that's all that's sustaining you, you're probably not in the right industry. Or you're probably not on the right path. That's at least what I think. So Mike, what do you think in terms of sales? Do you think tactics or mindset is more important?
Neither. So I think that tactics are when people come and they ask me, okay, they said this, what would you say back? Right. And that is not free thinking. And I'm not going to equip you with what you need in order to handle any of those interactions if I give you exactly what to say. Besides, the situations are too complex and there's a lot of contextual clues that need to be considered in order for me to actually answer how to handle I need to talk to my business partner, I need to talk to my spouse question, for example. Like, what I need to know is, how did they say it? What was their tone? What was the pace that they said it in? These are questions that people don't even ask. So the challenge for beginners is that, and this is why oftentimes as beginners, we are not good, is that as beginners, we ask the wrong questions, right? And so that's why, people like me or you have the habit of paying people who are not beginners to tell us what to do. And really what we're paying them to do is to tell us what not to do. So we don't make the common mistakes that everybody makes on the way, so we can crunch down and save our time, right? And so when we can figure out what not to do, oftentimes that's more valuable than even what to do. And then mindset is trumpeted way too much in the world of sales, right? So I'm a big believer that I don't give a fuck how much you believe the sun is going to rise from the west. It's not, right? Mechanics are more important than mindset every single day. If you're jumping up and down trying to defy gravity, no matter the self-belief you have, you're going to come back down.
Yeah. So
right?
when you say mechanics, that's not tactics?
It's not tactics, no.
So can you elaborate? So then it's neither tactics nor mindset. In your opinion, it's mechanics?
Yes. And mechanics to me are more understanding the frameworks and the building blocks of something and breaking it down into the first principles of how it all fits together. And also there's a very important thing that we look at is called progressions. So watch a baby. And so Mia is our baby, love her to death. 1-year-old right now. And so watching her over the past 6 months, she goes from, not being able to roll over to then being able to roll over. Then she's able to get on her hands and knees, but she's still not able to crawl. Then she's able to barely move. She can just get one little hand movement. And then gradually she gets to crawling, and then she gets to sitting up on her own. Then she gets to standing, but having to hold on to stuff. Then she gradually figures out how to walk while holding on to stuff. Then she can walk alone, right? So she's gone through a series of progressions that stack the skills. And by stacking the skills one on top of each other, they lead her to the ideal outcome. And nature naturally does that with all animals and all development. So we have applied the same principles to teaching sales, which is there's a series of progressions that you need to be able to lock in. And when we lock in these progressions, then you will powerfully sell.
Yeah. I think, and that reminded me of something I wanted to say earlier, when you mentioned that, when you're taking sales calls, that each sales call is like a micro laboratory, and that you learn, if you could just get one thing better in each call and stack those things up as time goes on, then you could add up all your learnings. I think one big mistake that a lot of people do, and not just in sales calls, but in business generally, is they, instead of learning one new thing and applying that in addition to the other one new things that they learn in each rep, they throw the whole bath out. Like they do something, it's wrong, and then they say the whole thing is wrong. In agency world, it's the niche. Yeah, everyone, I need to switch my niche. I have to switch my niche. This niche is broken. And I constantly find myself saying, your niche is not broken. I swear it's not the industry, because I have 20 other people that are killing it right now in the industry. It's not the industry. It's something else much smaller. And if we can just break through that barrier, you're going to be fine. And I think the same thing happens with sales. Like they'll test something, it won't go right. And so they'll throw that whole script out or that whole framework out. And it wasn't the framework, it was something smaller.
Yeah. And what happens is, this is just the scientific method at work, and really understanding how to apply science to scaling businesses. Because our approach to scaling businesses, obviously, how we work. I'm so about the numbers and the data, and if it doesn't add up or doesn't make sense, it's just not going to happen, right? So like everything has to mathematically be in alignment to me. And we run a lot of our stuff on statistics. We use statistics heavily to influence our decision making. And in the process of that, like, think about it like this. Let's say you're launching a new offer and a new funnel, and you're going into a new marketplace, and this is your new agency that you're rolling out. When you first launch, you have all these unproven variables. Granted, when they work with you, they have less unproven variables, right? So like for a newbie who's not working with you, their funnel's unproven, right? Yeah. They're gonna have unproven messaging. They're gonna have an unproven BSL. Their sales call or their salesperson is both unproven. Yeah. That like every part of their system, the message is unproven, the ad image is unproven, maybe the audience they're testing is unproven. So when you have all these variables that are unproven, you have more risk. And new entrepreneurs believe that entrepreneurs love risk. And I promise you, entrepreneurs do not love risk. We hate risk. Smart entrepreneurs figure out how to shift risk onto other people and mitigate risk as much as possible and create asymmetries. So we want maximum upside with minimum risk and least amount of effort. So we're applying leverage to create maximum upside with minimum risk. That's when you start thinking like an investor. And that's a different perspective when you're running businesses. So our job is to eliminate or minimize the risk. And in order to do that, we have to minimize the number of unproven variables. So granted, anytime you launch a new business or a new offering to a new marketplace, you're going to have a lot of unproven variables. But my goal is to get as many of them nailed down as fast as possible. And then from that point, I want to isolate the variable that I'm testing, run it long enough, and allow it to get statistically significant data, which most of you guys are making your decisions on batches of 5 or 10, which is like literally pointless. Is on a batch of 5 or 10, your numbers mean nothing. I don't even start making decisions until I have a batch of 30. And even then it's still a little skewed and I know I might be off. And once I get closer to 50, we're really in statistical significance. So most people, what they're doing is every time you switch niches, you're just putting so much more risk into this field.
You're starting from scratch all over again, all the learnings, anything that you did learn in that last niche, you just throw it out.
Yep, because it's not relevant anymore. And the same thing goes, like, for people when they come to me, I can't tell you how many times I've had to talk people off the ledge where they're like, they're pumping out 50, 60, 80 grand a month, but they hate their sales calls. Oh, I'm so exhausted. I'm so drained. I'm back on the phones. And then they're talking about trying to just sell an automated course, which strategically doesn't really work that well in the marketplace. And so I have so many of those conversations, like, please, for the love of God, do not switch to a course on a long form webinar and think that that's suddenly going to solve all your problems. Because
are those still working today?
No,
like, I know they were huge like 2016, but
yeah, they very rarely work because it's the economics of the marketplace and the economics of Facebook don't allow for them anymore. But people don't know that, and they don't know any better, and they see the idea of passive income. Oh, I make money on autopilot without doing anything, which is not necessarily the case. The case is there's leveraged income, right? So I can have a small amount of input and a large amount of output, but that also is built up over time. Like, people don't see how many 80-hour weeks I've worked or 60-hour weeks I've worked, and now I get to go tomorrow. I'm leaving for 10 days in Aruba, and I'm not going to look at my fucking phone, and we'll probably do a couple hundred G's in sales while I'm gone. You know what I mean? But that's a result of effort that's been built up, and me focusing on building assets, making sure that I have the right people in position, making sure that I equip those people with everything that they need to be successful, for them to meet their goals and grow and really care about them and invest in them. And then as a result, everything works, right? So it's just it's a much longer process than people think.
That is so big for me too. I went on like a Twitter rant recently about the whole passive income idea and the whole like passive income thing that everyone is after. And I think a lot of marketers have put that out there, and what it does is it's really affected the mindset of a lot of entrepreneurs. Like, to get to the point where you can fly to Aruba and make, a couple hundred grand from a team that's killing it does not happen without a ton of work building up to that point. You had to put in a ton of work on your business to build it to the point where you could enjoy that. There is no plug in and let it go.
You know how many stupid decisions we had to not make?
Yeah.
Most of these people are making stupid decisions that are costing them their business, right? Like, so it's not about doing all this work and doing all the right things. It's also about being smart enough and disciplined enough to not do the stupid things, to not switch niches or just, oh, we're going to pivot, to not just fire someone randomly because I was angry and I wasn't mature enough to be able to teach them or train them on how to think through a problem and step up as a leader. Like, to not just be like gut reactive with every decision and then, oh, I'm suddenly feeling down today, let me go change my life. And I think I said this once to you, which was like, have you ever woken up one morning from a hangover and been like, I'm going to quit drinking again, and you think you're going to change your life? Like, it's usually not a good idea to make a big long-term commitment decision when you're in that state of mind. Like, give yourself 2 days, let yourself level out, let your hormones get back to normal, let your emotions get back to normal, let yourself cool off, think about it with a rational mind, and then make your decision.
That leads, yes, you did to that. And I love the analogy. That leads perfectly into my next question, which is, how much do you think emotion plays into the sales process, both on the closer side and on the prospect side?
It's interesting. So one of the big things that what we teach that is really not taught out there at all, and I think that this is a big difference between how we teach sales and especially in our design of progressions, is this idea of buyer sophistication. So buyers exist on a spectrum of degrees of sophistication, right? So at the lowest end of the spectrum of sophistication, I would consider someone who is really young, maybe in their teens, comes from not a big city, doesn't have a good education, doesn't have a good job, maybe a little bit desperate or kind of down on their luck. Like they maybe didn't have educated parents or solid role models growing up. Like, that's going to be your lowest end of the sophistication spectrum, right? And they just don't have the experiences. And then through that, it depends on where someone's at. What's their experience in marketing and sales? Do they have a lot or a little? That's going to be depending on how I communicate with you, right? What's their education level? What's their natural communication style? Where did they grow up? And a big part of buyer sophistication, what really defines buyer sophistication is the number of buying and selling interactions you've had. That's your degree of sophistication, right? So I've sold and built and scaled businesses, lots of business, over 100 businesses to $1 million+ a year, right? And I teach people how to sell. I'm probably at one of the highest ends of the buyer sophistication spectrum outside of like a big enterprise purchaser, right? Or a government organization or a healthcare organization. They're probably the most sophisticated of all buyers, right? And so I'm a very sophisticated buyer. Any persuasion tricks or emotional jabs or digging into my pain that you're going to do to me, I'm going to fucking read right through it. I'm going to know exactly what you're doing. And if anything, you're going to lose respect in my eyes. Yeah. So it depends on who we're talking to. And once we figure that out, but the more sophisticated a buyer is, the more logical their decisions are. Because ultimately what happens is, as a buyer, think about people who are wealthy. People who are wealthy generally have better, more refined, more developed prefrontal cortexes, because a prefrontal cortex is the newest part of our brain. It's the part of our brain that is impulse control, planning, long-term thinking, all the things that are tied to wealth creation and wealth building, right? And so in order to have a high degree of impulse control, that means you don't buy shit you don't need or don't want, or that doesn't make sense, right? You don't do stupid things. That's impulse control. Whereas when you have a low degree of impulse control, you buy anything and everything, which is why people in the hood oftentimes have trackers on their device, on their cars, and they have a car at an 18.99% interest that they can't afford. And then they're leveraging payments and like they're getting chased down and repoed, or their houses are getting foreclosed on when they're broke. Because generally they don't have as much impulse control, they don't make as wise of decisions, and they are easier to sell into things, right? So once you understand that spectrum, then you have to adapt your conversation or your sales process and how emotional or how logical you are with your presentation based on all these factors.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think nothing like one of the things that can sink a really good big fish really fast is trying to sell them with cheap tactics. Yes. Right? Like trying to sell them with like, you know, the things that would sell those lower sophisticated buyers, like repellent. Yeah, I actually like, I consider myself a more sophisticated buyer as well, and I know this because I bought a $7,000 course on just something I wanted to understand better, and like the investment was no big issue for me. Like I had already sold myself before getting on that call, and so but being forced on that call to go through pain points and this whole journey that I honestly, I really wanted to buy the product. It was just like, it was hell getting dragged through that process. And it was like, I still bought it at the end because I wanted it, but yeah, it was really uncomfortable being forced through that when I was already mentally past that.
And that's what's interesting. Like a lot of sales reps think that, oh, I closed them. And it's like, one of the questions when you are selling, you have to ask yourself is, did this person buy because of me or in spite of me? Right? Yeah. Because I will buy in spite of people all the time. I literally bought a product, same thing. I'm like, oh my God, the girl was in college. You know, she's just, I could tell she doesn't know her shit. All her math doesn't add up. I'm asking questions. She can't answer any technical questions. And I was just like so frustrated in the buying experience because I'm hyper analytical when I purchase. I'm relatively sophisticated and all this stuff doesn't work on me. So I still bought the product, but I didn't buy the product because she was a great salesperson. I bought in spite of her. And it was just like, please just get the fuck out of my way and let me get the outcome, or let me get whatever little thing I want. And nothing she said was a thing that set me over the edge. You know what I mean? So you have to ask yourself, are my people buying because of me or in spite of me? And that's a really big question sometimes to consider, because your offer or your marketing can be so good that people are just like, whatever, and they'll deal with the sales process.
Like they come to the call sold.
Yep.
Yeah. Regardless, and like no matter where you take them, they were gonna purchase anyway. I think that's something that's huge, and that's something that like I don't think is thought about often. So that's a really good nugget. So for the agency owners that are listening, let's say you're an agency owner, you're considering on hiring closers for your agency, you're tired of taking your sales calls. What's something that agency owners should do to foster a good relationship with closers?
Okay. Well, this is an interesting question because there's a few different things. But the first thing I think is fundamentally you have to bring the closer in at the right time.
Yeah.
Right? If your timing's out of whack, I don't care how nice you are, I don't care how supportive you are, I don't care how good the closer is, it fundamentally will fail and everybody will have a frustrating experience if the timing is not correct.
Yeah.
So you need to know when to bring them in. And to answer that, because you guys are probably wondering, okay, well, when do I bring them in? It's gonna vary a little bit based on your tolerance for sales calls and how much you like them. Like for me, sales calls don't feel like work. I could take 3-5 of them in a day and it's fun and I love closing deals and chatting up people and it's easy for me, right?
Yeah.
But for some people it's an emotional drain. And so it depends on your tolerance for sales calls is a big thing that I look at. But ultimately for most people, we kind of break down the scaling process into 4 phases really. So the first phase is what we call army of one. So an army of one, you are the solopreneur, you are the wearer of all hats, you are your janitor, you are the cook, you are the everything in your business, right? And in that phase, your job is one thing: create, message, market, match. You need to find an offer that hits, and you need to find a message angle that sells. And you need to create a predictable stream of people who are interested in that. That's it. That's all you work on.
Yeah.
Create, message, market, match. Once you have message, market, match, then it's time to start scaling. And in order to start scaling, you move into the next phase, which we call one big team. And in the process of one big team, your goal is to, on all frontline roles. So if you're buying ads, if you're writing your copy, if you're doing your sales calls, if you're coaching in your program, I want to delegate all of those to team members and then support all those team members in delivering our promise consistently, right? And so at that point is usually where the sales reps and closers are going to come in. And so most people will be at 20 to 30 grand a month when that happens.
Yeah.
Some people can hold out, like the people who have high tolerances for sales calls and they really like them. We've had people be at 100 grand months solo, and that's where they break. We have people that break at 25 or 30 grand a month. So it just depends on you. Like for me, I was running at 90, 100 grand a month myself because we have a 9, or it was 9, now it's 12 grand offer. And so basically I could run at that pace while still running the business, writing copy, managing ads, coaching clients, doing everything there. And so where that is for you is going to vary. One of the pieces of advice that I tell most founders is whatever your tolerance is, hold out as long as you can, because the more cash we can stack, the safer it is for us to take off.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, you're not paying a commission, obviously, when you're doing your own sales calls, but it's a tolerance level on the agency owner. I think, there are a lot of factors that go into it. I think post bringing them on, I've seen a wide range of experiences happen. Like we do a lot of like personality matching as well, because it's important that culturally they fit. And I think it's also really important for agency owners to understand that when you're bringing in a commission-based role, that they need support, they need encouragement, they need a lot of communication, and they also don't need extra work dumped on them that you don't want to do. So like they're not your VA, they're not your lead gen guy. Like they're there to close deals that you have brought into them. And I think where a relationship can sour really easily, from what I've seen, is like an agency owner that gets a commission based closer, and they're like, hey, I'm gonna give you these these booked calls, but can you start hitting these cold lists as well and start cold calling people? Can you start doing this manual outreach? And like, when you take a closer that's used to inbound calls and you start asking them to do all these extra tasks, and like you lose sight of like, okay, this role is commission. Like I should be feeding them and then they're closing and then helping us grow the business. So I think managing expectations of that role is also really important.
100%. And that is a bang on observation. And even to add on to that is when you look at closers and setters and the different styles of salespeople, you know, it's like saying, oh, you're a writer. Oh, you're a writer. You're just a writer. It's like, are they a songwriter? Are they a journalist? You know what I mean? Are they someone who writes novels? Are they a nonfiction ghostwriter? Because those are all completely different people. That's
Right.
not even the same thing. You know what I mean? And so with salespeople, people think salesperson, and it's not, right? There's specialization inside of sales, just like there's specialization inside of writing, and certain personalities lend themselves better to certain roles. So, for example, I am a savage closer. Like, if there's a deal, it will be closed. If there is a deal, I don't let deals go by. Like, I just can't. I don't even know. It's like an instinct. It's the weirdest thing. And so it's so easy and it's so natural and it's so effortless for me.
Yeah.
Setting, I can't do. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. And it's more on a personal preference thing. It's not because the work's beneath me. It's just that work and my personality and my strengths aren't in alignment. And so what I have to do on that feels like I'm constantly going uphill. Whereas I feel like I can coast on closing, and it's that like I'm producing so much with very little input. So when you and then what happens is closing is generally a higher skill role because it's a much more nuanced conversation. It takes a lot more sophistication to know all the details and to hit the right buttons and to guide the emotions the way you need to guide them to where they need to be. That being the case, if you take a closer who's really a high value team member, like the average earnings on closers are between, usually it's 120 to 180 is the normal range for someone who's a closer to get comped on an annual basis when they hit their targets, right? So you're talking about 10 to 15 grand a month. And even the upper band people are hitting 25, sometimes 30 grand a month if they're really insane at closing. Setters generally make between 3 and 6 grand a month on how good they are, how senior they are, and whatnot, right? So you're asking $180,000 resource to do the work that should be allocated to a $36,000 or $40,000 per year resource. Yeah. And so you are so severely misallocating resources, and the closer gets frustrated and gets mad and leaves. And on the other end, you have setters who, if you ask a setter who's a $40,000 a year resource because of their skill sets and where they're at, you generally, you ask them to do a $180,000 per year job. Normally setters can't close the front door, and everybody's saying how nice they are and what a good person they are and how great they represented your company and your product, but then nobody's buying and everybody's thinking about it and everybody's talking about it with their spouse and everybody's going to be back in 2 months and nobody comes back.
So true. I've totally experienced that. Yes.
And the setters are enthusiastic. You know, they mean well. They have their intentions are in the right place. They'll generally even be hardworking and trying to do it, but it's just they don't have that skill yet. And yeah. I am, as a business owner, especially if I'm trying to get off the phones and I'm in these early phases and I'm trying to minimize my risk, I can't afford for you to learn on the job.
Yeah.
I need you to know how to sell, and what you're going to learn is my offer. What you're going to learn is the nuances of the market, and I can show you those, but you need to know how to sell. And that's why our fundamental promise is we introduced 4 proven 7-figure salespeople who have done $1 million as a consultative salesperson. So they've had the sheer number of interactions. They know all the different things they're going to hear. They can parry anything. They feel comfortable asking for big amounts. They feel comfortable in difficult conversations. They know how to navigate all that, right? So that is like a big thing when people look at setters and closers and trying to get them to do everything, is they're not understanding that these actually aren't the same people in the first place.
Not at all. It's the same problem you run into when you try and just hire any Joe Schmo off the street who's not really truly a closer, who's saying he's a closer because he's, taking a few calls here and there. And then you try and make them a closer. It without the right training and processes in place, it's just not going to happen. We are running out of time. So I do want to ask you these final two questions. The first one being, what is your biggest piece of advice that you'd give to a new closer that's looking to crush it into the sales industry?
Fall in love with the process. That's it. Just love the process and really like be interested in getting 1% better every single day.
Mhm.
And then give it time and show up every day, day in, day out. And then it compounds. And in 2-3 years, you won't even recognize who you are anymore.
Yeah. And I think what we said kind of earlier echoes there too. If after 3-6 months, you're still not in love with the process at all, it might not be your path. Yeah. Okay. And then what would be your biggest piece of advice for new business owner or new agency owner looking to hire their first closer and grow eventually a sales team?
Hire us.
That's an easy one.
Yeah, don't reinvent the wheel. It doesn't make sense. I mean, if you look at all of our case studies, we have like the most insane case studies out, and it's just our clients do our selling for us. We don't even have to say shit hardly, because just clients are so like the results are so insanely stupid that they're not even believable.
Do you ever run into business owners that have a hard time, that know they need to offload their sales process, but have a hard time letting go of it?
Yeah. So there's actually a really interesting thing that happens for a lot of business owners. And this may be a little bit more in the coaching community, but it still does happen in the agency world a good amount. Which is that when you go from not having a business to now you have a business, it feels good to be needed. It feels good to be significant. It feels good to solve people's problems, and it feels good for people to want your time, to want your energy, to want your attention, right? And so it's easy to gas yourself up at this point and start to think that like nobody else can do it as good as me. I have to do it all myself. Or it's easy to sometimes interfere with other people's development and learning process because of that need to feel special, to feel like the hero, to save the day, to be the playmaker. Like that need, your need for significance will severely limit your ability to grow.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that leads into micromanaging the roles.
That's exactly the actual symptom of that is micromanagement.
Yeah.
And that's something you do amazing. And your team like loves it. Your team has a blast. And one of the things I love about watching you and how you manage your team is that you and your team could not be any more different, right? You are pretty left, like, and your whole team's a bunch of rabid Republicans, and like they're hilarious. And the fact is, you never let that get in the way. And too many people would say, "Oh, this person believes this, they're crazy, whatever." But it doesn't matter. They have the skill that needs to be there in order to get the job done. And they may have a different religion. They may have a different sexual orientation. They may have a different political system or political belief system, but that doesn't fucking matter. What matters is that they're a good person who really genuinely does care, who's genuinely trying to do the best that they can, and who has the skill sets that you need in order to scale and grow and serve more people.
100%. Like the diversity of my team, I think, is one of the biggest assets that we have, and I absolutely love having that wide range. I think it serves so many other purposes too. Like when a new team member joins, they're like, "Oh shit, look at this 20-year-old who just sold like 100K in the last 7 days." Like if he can do it living in his parents' house, like I can do this. Like, you know what I mean? It just shows the versatility of if you're dedicated to the process, it really doesn't matter who you are, as long as you bring the skill to the table with an offer that works, like it's gonna work for you. So I think it helps motivate the team as well.
100%.
Yeah. No, it's really cool. I think this has been an amazing hour talking with you, Mike. I think I skipped over several questions that I wanted to ask as well, just so we could fit in time, because I knew it was going to go like that as well. I knew we were going to have a great time going through all this. Before we wrap this up, if someone is struggling in their sales process, and then they're at that mark where it's time, like you mentioned before, to consider your coaching sales and bringing in closers, how do they go ahead and get a hold of you guys?
Yeah, there's one resource that I'd really send most people to that's going to answer a lot of the preliminary questions of like, how do you do this properly? How do you guys work? All those types of questions. Where do I need to be? What do I need to have in place? And that would be coachingsales.com/playbook. And so playbook, yeah. And so coachingsales.com/playbook. It's a pretty in-depth resource, but it answers a lot of questions about the recruiting parts of things, the training parts of it, the management part of it, because you really need to have all three of those in order to have a functioning sales team.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Mike.
Love it.
Awesome.